my goal is to help as many life sciences companies change the world, literally.
Yeah. How do you walk them through like this problem solving step?
So oftentimes we are introduced to companies that say like, oh, we're going to do this, we're inventing this, and then we're going to try to find how it can apply to healthcare. And we're like, no, you start with a problem, then you create the technology solution to solve that. That's how it goes. That's the order you should do it in.
As an outsider, I've seen so many companies fail, not because they didn't have the right strategy. They knew which problem to attack, but they didn't have the ammunition when they were going out on the field to battle. They didn't have the right people.
But everyone has a superpower. And I feel like the more clarity we have on what is our secret sauce, what's our superpower, I think it can be very empowering.
Holley, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor.
Yeah, I love your energy, and I want to start off by saying I can't remember doing a single thing in my life for 19 years. How have you been running a life science marketing agency, Gray Matter, for 19 years? And do you ever think about that journey? And when you're thinking about it, what are the few things that come to your mind?
Well, this is a true story. So 19 years ago, I lost a bet, and I've got one more year to go, and then I'm free. I'm just kidding. But, I think the truth is that I didn't really set out to create the first healthcare category design firm. I just knew after 10 years being on the kind of client side, industry side with some amazing companies, I just wanted more personal agency to do what I think matters to meaningfully advance healthcare and the delivery of it. And that's really what I started Gray Matter with, the premise, which is our tagline, which is do what matters. So I was actually supposed to go to law school, but I decided to defer my admission. And I ended up working in some marketing and promotional companies doing things like direct mail insurance and like selling cigarettes, and just wasn't that exciting to me or that inspiring. But it still seemed better than becoming a lawyer. And so that actually kind of led me by luck, I guess, into the life sciences space. I ended up taking a marketing position with a company in California that at the time was creating a new category of soft tissue surgical robotics. And it just kind of blew me away. And I realized like, I'm hooked. Like, this is what I want to do with my life. And to this day, my mom still asks me how nice it would be if we had a lawyer in the family.
Yeah, I think it's, the good thing is that because of your profession and what you do in life sciences, whether you're a lawyer or not, you're still, going through regulations, right? So like, sometimes I explain to people like, oh, I work in quality compliance. I do like software. Like, oh, so you are a software legal person? I was like, no, I'm not. I guess you could call me that, but I don't have a law degree, right? So like, but in our industry, we can't really escape the law, unless you're in like HR or some other function, right?
No.
So yeah.
In some ways, that's what I really like about this space, is that it is highly regulated for good reason, of course, but also it makes it more challenging. Like, I love a good challenge. And I feel like, you could work for Apple and have a gazillion-dollar budget, but like, this is way more challenging, but I really like that personally.
So 19 years is an amazing span, right? And I haven't been able to ask this question to anybody else because they haven't spent 19 years doing one thing. So how has this, you can pick anything, like let's say you pick life science marketing, or let's say you pick branding or category design. If you pick one of these areas, how have you seen that 19 years ago and how it's being done today? What's the big shift happening?
I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm overly dramatic, but marketing specifically is radically different now than it was 20 years ago. I mean, all business aspects, but I remember being, like a PR and IR manager and at life sciences, more than 20 years ago. It was like 30 years ago. And I had to literally go into the office and fax a press release to even get it on the newswire for distribution. Like that's how archaic I am. And I think I was one of the last people that had a BlackBerry. Like, I'm on a plane, you have to kind of clawed away from my hand. But I think really marketing was very much considered what I call arts and crafts, which was like, your job was to just make a pretty brochure or make a presentation for the sales team. And I think that many, device and pharma companies, like that's still a little bit what marketing does. They
Mm,
still embrace that legacy kind of sales led revenue model. Reps drive RXs or procedures, not marketing. But I think the two biggest fundamental shifts is really the kind of empowerment of the patient,
mm,
and also really how marketing now is in, I don't want to say the driver's seat, but certainly can have a seat at the table in terms of really helping to educate the market. And that's really, I think, the fundamental core kind of precedence that has to
mm,
happen is you have to really teach the market that something is that they have a problem that is really needs to be urgently addressed, and if you do, it'll transform your life. And that's really what drives behavior change and embraces new drugs, new therapies, new standards of care. And so I think really marketing has shifted its role, and I think the patient has it's an ongoing thing, but kind of an empowered patient, I think, are two of the stark contrasts when I look back over 19 years and think about where are we today? What does business look like?
mm.
And how is technology? Yeah, that's in the background. That's a no-brainer. What's changed in 20 years? But I think marketing and the patient have actually taken a much more kind of aggressive and assertive role in what it means to drive healthcare and also to drive revenue at companies.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. And when you were explaining, how like back in the day you had to like go and fax something from your office to get the press release out. I've heard like other stories from people who work in, let's say, regulatory, and they're like, "Oh, we remember having, a truck or a car with all our regulatory dossiers driving to Silver Spring, Maryland to the FDA office like
Yes.
a few
Yes.
weeks before
Yeah.
just to go to the front door, give the whole box to them, get a stamp that we filed the stuff, and
It's
now
true.
it's
Yeah.
all
They had to drive
electronic.
in a snowstorm, right?
Yep,
Uphill both ways. And it sounds ridiculous, but like that, that was reality.
yep,
That was reality. And you had to get it there. It's like FedEx, we absolutely have to have it there. It's like we absolutely have to have your submission. Like you're like, that's my job. I'll drive to
yep.
Maryland and deliver it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I know. You've started at you started your career, as you mentioned, at Allergan and Intuitive Surgical. I want to ask you some stuff about Intuitive Surgical because that's like a fascinating company. But when and then you started Gray Matter, and you worked with tons of clients. Before we got on camera, you told me you've got clients in Israel. You were used to early morning meetings, so I'm assuming you worked with all shapes and sizes of clients. And one of the things I see on your content on LinkedIn, how I discovered you, I think it was one post that a video you had made about Eminem, and how you're like, you're mentioning something about how it is why it is important to not just be part of a category, but to try to own the category, or quote unquote create your own category. So why do you think that's so crucial? And what can you give advice to people who are trying to achieve that goal?
Category design, I would say, is not for the weak of heart, but I think once you see it and understand the premise and really the business lens, it's pretty transformative. And so category design is something that's existed for hundreds of years. We just didn't have a label on it. And I
Mm,
think that there are many category creation examples in the life sciences space that, again, people don't recognize that's what it is. They just think, wow, that's an amazing company. Look at Intuitive Surgical.
yeah.
And I think the truth of the matter is all of those companies that really create new categories or even redesign a category, for instance, your iPhone, Apple didn't invent the smartphone, right? They just
Mm,
redesigned the category of what is a smartphone. And that happens too. Uh, I think Abbott is a great example. Like they redefined what a heart valve is. They didn't invent the heart valve. The heart valve
yeah.
just was not a great, it wasn't a great invention. It needed improvement. And so the companies that recognized there's something missing in the market, and if we could fix that, it would have an amazing, positive transformational outcome. Let's do that instead of
Mm,
just trying to make an incrementally better, heart valve or, better drug, fewer side effects. Like those are good, but
yeah.
that's really been the lens that most life sciences companies, again, regardless of sector, they're like, we're going to compete and be the better, the best product. We're going to compete on features. We're going to compete on price. And that's fine. Companies can be very successful, But category creators basically say, like, we're going to really do the hard road and be different, not
Mm.
better, different.
Yeah.
And so intuitive surgical is interesting because if you are going to create a new category, which means, if you think about it in the you were talking about regulatory in the essence of like regulatory classifications. If you're a 510K device submission, you're basically saying I'm substantially equivalent to your
Mm. Mm.
product. That's how you get approved.
Yep.
We're the same. We're the same. And so if that's if that's the case and you go to market, how do you convince, a surgeon or a doctor that your product is any different or better? It's the same, right?
Yeah.
De novo is saying, okay, like we're so unique that there is no classification. That's kind of category design in essence, but it extends in many more ways. And so what happened with intuitive surgical for many years, surgeons thought, you know what, like surgery is very effective. We can, open up a patient, we can get to the source of their problem, sew them back up, they're on their way. So we fixed the problem, but we had to, open the patient's, sternum, crack the ribs to get at the heart. Super traumatic. And while they may have fixed the clogged heart vessel, the patient then goes through a very long and difficult recovery process, which has other risks, surgical site infections, other comorbidities. And so everyone was like, what if surgery was less invasive?
Mm.
Sounded great, right? Sounds great. But to do that is super hard. You're basically saying, hey, surgeon, you could access the chest, but now we're going to close it up and make you operate with, chopsticks with
Mm.
no
Mm.
dexterity and, trimmer. Like it was a great idea, but super hard to execute.
Yeah.
And so the interesting thing about intuitive surgical is they weren't the only company doing that. There was another company, Computer Motion. And
Mm.
that's actually who I worked with. So they had two companies with the same idea. And what happens in category design by being different, what happens is at some point, someone has to win. Someone will
Yep.
become the dominant design. And in the case of soft tissue surgical robotics, Computer Motion ended up getting acquired by Intuitive. Intuitive took them
Interesting.
out.
Mm.
But then there's been one dominant design, one category king, as we say, for over 20, almost 30 years now.
Mm.
And so
Mm.
the idea is that really transformed surgery in a way that will never go backwards.
Yep.
And now companies are trying to figure out how to create new categories in robotics, but they're doing it with hard tissue, which is like, your bones, but also endovascularly to reach other parts of the body in less invasive ways. So that's like in my mind what got me so excited about the idea of why compete and try to
Mm.
be better when you can be different and solve a different problem for a different audience that is transformative. And so
Yeah.
like to me, that's once you see that, you have I'm motivated to help companies do the same thing.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, and it's interesting, what you said, where why compete when you can own the category, and then you also gave the example of like, like yes, there is a if you're defining a category, you have a focus group. So like let's say in case of intuitive surgicals, they're looking at surgeons and they're looking at their day in a life of a surgeon and what that person is going through, and then they come to the different problems that they have, like, okay, make surgery less invasive, or make this equipment less expensive, whatever that list is. When you are working with a brand new medtech client that comes to you or calls you and like, hey, I am my team or my software or my team is specialized in surgery or dialysis or whatever the area is, how can I create my cat? How do you walk them through like this problem solving step to say, have you, these are the 7 things. Which of these do you think can you dominate? Like, can you give us an example?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's actually when we work with clients, and again, regardless of sector, regardless of, are they pre-commercial,
Mm.
already have products in the market and they're doing, a new product introduction or a line expansion, the first question we always ask them is, what problem do you solve?
Mm.
And it's funny because it's like having a baby. You think your baby's so beautiful, it's amazing, it's so talented, it's gonna like, become president one day and change the world. That's how
Yeah.
you think about your technology, right? Again, whether it's a drug device, therapeutic, whatever. And so we always start the conversation as, yes, your baby is very beautiful, but what does your baby do? You know, what's different about your baby? What problem does your baby solve that people care about? And we use a very simple grid. It's got 4 quadrants, and in the upper right is delighters. Then it goes nice to haves. The bottom left is annoyances, and the top right are disgusters. Okay, so you have delighters, nice to haves, annoyances, and disgusters. And we say, what problem? Let's map it on this grid. And what we find is that most companies, the problem they're trying to solve is probably a nice to have or an annoyance. And guess
I
what?
see.
That's not probably a big enough problem to get people to change their behavior. Because again, I'm a surgeon, for example, I'm operating. I think I do amazing work. I'm a doctor. I'm treating my patients for 20 years. I use, the same drug regimen or protocol because I see really good results. So to get a surgeon or a doctor, or frankly, a human being to change their behavior is super hard unless you can address a disguster. And so the example we always give is you think about an airline company. If you get a free upgrade to business class, that's a delighter, right?
Yep.
That makes you excited. If you give people, free snacks, that's a nice to have. No one's not going to fly because they get, don't get a bag of, pretzels or whatever.
Yeah.
An annoyance would be maybe the middle seat, but hey, if I'm an important, executive and I have to get to a meeting in Chicago, I live in San Francisco. So if I'm flying from Chicago to San Francisco, then I absolutely have to get to that meeting. And so I'll sit in an annoying middle seat because my priority is to get to my destination.
Right.
But if you cancel my flight and you do it too many times, I will stop flying United. And I will fly to another airline that can solve the problem of canceling my flight. And so what we always say is, what's your canceled flight? What's that problem for your particular audience that if you basically fix that, they will switch airlines? And so it's a very simple way to think about it. But people don't change their behavior because of delighting things. They change their behavior because you address the disgusters.
Interesting. Yeah. No, I love that analogy because actually I'm traveling like 7 different places this year, and a bunch of my flights are on United. So I'm fingers crossed they don't cancel the flight because that's going to be a lot of headache. But yeah, I love that framework, and I love how you explained, because I was going to ask you, like, what are some mistakes that companies make? And you already said one, which is like trying to focus too much on just solving the nice to haves and not trying to fix the things that can delight. And another angle of this I've heard in, service, like consulting agencies and service businesses, because I have a lot of friends in that space, is I've asked people, hey, what's the difference between a good consultant and a great one? And I was always under the impression that, the great consultants who work at McKinsey, Bain, all these companies, they're really, analytical. They're like Excel, proficient at Excel. They're good at slides. And one of the people that I talked to, he basically told me the difference between the good and the great is a good consultant focuses on a customer's problem. So they go to the customer say, oh, this software is not working. Okay, here, I fixed it. Oh, I need I need you to help me respond to this FDA letter. Oh, okay, here's the response. And the great ones solve the industry problem. So the great ones are seeing, oh, 3 people are talking about this problem. Like, I need to stop doing everything else and just like go deep on this one, because then they know, like to your example, they're owning that category, right? Because now they've instantly got credibility from 3 same people who have the same problem, and they're validating that, yes, other people in the industry also have that same problem. So yeah, it reminded me of that because I just had that conversation last week.
It's a great example, and so true to, again, no matter what your sector is, no one is buying your product. They're buying what your product makes happen for them, or the outcome. And so the closer you get, there's a quote by Theodore Levitt from Harvard Business School, which says, no one buys a quarter-inch hole, they're buying no one buys a quarter-inch drill, they're buying a quarter-inch hole. Meaning, to your point, whatever the problem is, if you can fix that, that is what actually, drives revenue, drives loyalty, drives advocacy. And so oftentimes we are introduced to companies that say like, oh, we're going to do this, we're inventing this, and then we're going to try to find how it can apply to healthcare. And we're like, no, you start with a problem, then you create the technology solution to solve that. That's how it goes. That's the order you should do it in. And I think that's a
Yeah.
wonderful way to say, what problem are we solving? Yeah.
Right, right. And also the other thing is that, when you are solving, let's say, whatever problem you're solving for either your space or whether you're designing a product or what have you, the other thing to also learn is to try to play to your strengths, because what I see a lot of times companies do is, yes, they have this desire to own a category or do something, but they try to go at it without building their team or without having the right people. And it just, as an outsider, I've seen so many companies fail just because they didn't have the right, not because they didn't have the right strategy. They knew which problem to attack, but they didn't have the ammunition when they were going out on the field to battle. They didn't have the right people. So have you seen some of that with your, I know you don't help with maybe with talent and hiring and all of that, but have you told people, hey, you need a X guy or X female in this position with this credibility and this skills if you're going to shoot for this target?
We have, and I think it can vary, but I think it does span a number of different, functional areas.
Yeah.
I think sometimes either they devalue certain roles or they wait too long for certain roles, or they're not aligned with respect to what are the implications of decisions that are made. And so I'll give you an example. The companies that are, certainly in the startup phase, pre-revenue, they're oftentimes it's their first product. They recognize that they need regulatory consultant for sure. Like that's, a critical part of bringing any type of technology or innovation to market. But they're tasked with the job of how can we get this product to market as fast as possible,
Hmm.
and less amount of money. And that might be, for a device, it might be a class one, it might be a class two,
Yep.
510K exempt. And that consultant did their job. I'm not picking on regulatory, that's just an example. But the problem with that is that there haven't been the conversations around, okay, well, what are the limitations of a class one device?
Hmm.
What can you say? What can you claim? You can't just say, we're going to sell a red pen. You're usually saying, we're going to sell a better pen that,
Yep.
writes upside down, writes underwater, is see through blood, whatever that is. But if you're a class one device, then yes, you got through the regulatory process very quickly and at a lower price, but you can't do anything with your product. And so I think, to your point, having those fruitful conversations early enough and making sure that, yes, you find the best regulatory pathway there, but also what are the implications of that? So I think, that's very important. Manufacturing is another big pillar. I think that's very important, which is, you can design a product, but if you don't understand really, the human factor element, let's say you're making a new surgical instrument and it gets to market and you realize it's too expensive to make.
Hmm.
No
Hmm.
one's going to buy this because it's too expensive to make, or surgeons, it's too big for surgeon hands, like things like that. They're just obvious mistakes that aren't uncovered until very far down the line.
Yep.
And we see the implications of cost, time, revenue. All those things can have huge implications. And so I think there needs to be a real vision from the beginning about what are we trying to do, why, who is this going to benefit the most.
Yep.
Even as something as simple as a decision of who is the patient population we're going after. If you're a small company trying to treat something like migraine, for instance, that's a huge, massive problem. Are you going to really build out your entire, a massive sales force to go and compete against, the Pfizers of the world?
Right.
It's very hard to do. So is there a smaller segment, maybe, the pediatric population, that you feel like you could actually go and win and dominate because you actually do solve a problem for that patient population, and then figure out how to get bigger. So I do
Hmm.
think there's a multitude of ways you can, kind of shoot yourself in the foot, but really understanding from the beginning, what are we trying to do? Why? Not what's the fastest way to do it or the
Yep.
cheapest way to do it, but what's the right way to do it to really create the category shift we're looking for that would not just advance the standard of healthcare, but would have a material implication to the company's finances and the valuation of the company, which is,
Yeah.
not to be ignored.
Yeah, yeah. No, it also, there's another, just going back to your point about, trying to work on the delight and, not just trying to shoot for the nice to haves or the other ones. So there's another like quote in I've read in like some marketing like blogs and stuff, which is like, sell, I think it's like, sell the painkillers, not the vitamins, or something along those lines. I'm not sure if I'm saying it right, but it's the same idea. It's like, right, like you need to solve a problem, because there's also this other thing that I was reading when I started my journey, which is, going back to your point, is how do you motivate people to take action, right? So like, people are more likely to take action if you can tell them that they're gonna avoid a lot of pain by doing that thing, or they're gonna, get promoted or make more money, because everybody cares about status, right? So like, every, or they care about looks and appearance, because that's also related to status, right? So like, if you're a fitness coach, you can be like, hey, if you do this program or you follow this nutrition thing, here's your goals, right? So there's like only 3 or 5 things that human beings really care about, and if you can always look at your problem and say, which of these I'm gonna check, right? Obviously, they don't want friction in their work. That's why, AI is such a big thing, because nobody likes manual copy pasting, right? So like, everybody's going to chat GPT and, using it for their work, because it takes away that pain, right? For $20 a month. So that's, I think I see that trend across every successful company, that's owning their category or being like a leader in that space.
100% agree. And we always say, like, are you a painkiller? Are you a vitamin? To your
Yeah,
point,
yeah.
if I run out of vitamins, I'm like, okay, but if I, have a massive headache and I'm out of, my painkillers or my Advil, I'm going to get in my car, drive to the pharmacy, grab it and take it home. And I think I'll share it with you, but there's a great, it's called the B2B pyramid. It's by Bain, they put out. And
Hmm.
it's like, to your point, the hierarchy of need. And it's this idea of, look, there are table stakes, in the life sciences space, you have to have, safe quality products. But as you go up the pyramid, that really starts to ladder up with people's interior motivations, their personal motivations. And the higher up, to your point, you can tick those boxes in a way that's unique to your company, the more likely they are to really change their behavior, to your point, and really almost like dig their claws into you. They're not going to give you up, because you are going to create marketability for them, personal wealth, kind of altruistic, changing the world. Like, the higher you can get up, the better you can be. So it's actually a great reminder that we are still dealing with humans, no matter what your application is, and humans really all operate the same way. So I'll share
Right.
that with you if you're interested.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would love that. I wanna go to one of your LinkedIn posts, because I love the what you wrote, and I'm still shocked why a lot of people have not reacted to it, because it's really good. So it says, your life sciences market domination framework. If you're a CEO, hang this up in your office somewhere and stare at it every day, right? And then you go into explaining, by the way, first of all, that's a really good hook. So, because yeah,
Thank you.
I've seen that. Hang this on your wall, like, hang this in your office. So, what for? Because like I said, I'm surprised why more people have not resonated to that, because I could feel what you wrote was very actionable. Do you want to expand on what those 4 pillars are for the audience?
Yes, be happy to. So, I think, again, sometimes we overcomplicate things, and
Yeah.
it's not that hard, really. And I think the more, I always say, like, one of the strengths of gray matter is that we aren't maybe the subject matter expert in, immunology or cancer or, you know, prostate, whatever, pick your area of
Yeah.
specialty. But I think that serves us well because we ask what I call the dumb questions, which are actually just really basic questions that everyone should be asking themselves. And I think it creates, clarity. And I think clarity can bring velocity across many, many, many ways. And so I think when it comes down to those four pillars, these are in order, I think. Again, the first one is problem definition. So again, are you solving a real urgent market need? Again, are you the painkiller, right, for a certain
Mm,
segment of
mm,
audience? And again, not for everybody, but a certain segment. And then the second one is your audience segmentation. Do you know exactly who needs your solution? Because if you think about that, kind of acuity lever, um, going back to the canceled flights, right, that we were talking about as the
yeah.
discussor. If I'm a college student and you cancel my flight, I might be delighted. I might get a free voucher for an extra, $500 off on my next flight. That would be amazing to me. But if I'm a
Mm,
CEO again, and I'm trying to get to my important meeting, if you cancel my flight, I will stop flying United. And so
yep.
again, your audience, the audiences will not all experience or suffer from that pain point the same way. I've never
Mm,
in my career have ever said, "Oh, this magic pill, whatever it is, fixes everyone's problems equally." It's just not true. There is an acuity level, and you have to find the segment that
mm,
has the highest level. And again,
yep.
companies are like, "No, but we can do this for everybody." It's like it doesn't make a difference. You have to find that kind of killer beachhead, that strategic beachhead, that killer application. Going back to Intuitive Surgical, their killer applications was one surgery. It was a radical prostatectomy. That was it.
Mm,
That's what they built their entire, kind of foundation on. And
yep.
so I think companies just, Zithermax, the Z-Pak is another example. They went after the pediatric population,
Mm,
which some people thought was crazy, but it's because they couldn't basically find a way into the adult population because there was already an established, category king or category, standard of care. And so audience segmentation is super, super, super important.
yep.
Um, Competitive advantage, you mentioned this, are you really different? Are you slightly better? Solve something that you can uniquely solve. Sometimes I call that the your unfair competitive advantage,
Mm-hmm.
which is double down on something that really you guys can own that someone else can't say, "Oh, we do that too." And that's
Mm,
yeah, that's like the true test. If someone else, a competitor can say, "We do that too," you got to go back to the drawing board and figure out a unique problem that you can solve that no one else can, that a specific audience cares about. It's that
mm,
simple. And then the last one is really about commercial readiness, which is, does your organization have a cohesive strategy? Meaning, you touched on this earlier too. No category king. And when I say category king, those are the companies that really create or dominate a market. And they tend to earn 76% of the valuation, not the market share, the valuation. Everyone
mm.
else is
Wow.
left fighting for scraps. And so that requires really a supremely aligned organization. Your
Mm,
sales, your marketing, your product, your medical, everyone has to be very clear on the vision. Our vision is to cure cancer. Our vision is so that no child, sleeps with, goes to bed with a hungry stomach, like whatever that thing
right,
is. There has
right.
to be a very clear vision that is motivating, and people would actually change their behavior if they believe that's a big problem. And so often when we look at companies that maybe start with a great problem that they can solve and find that specific audience, they can't get their internal teams to work together.
Mm,
Sales is off doing their own thing, medical is doing their own thing, marketing's doing their own thing. And it's really sad to me to think that there are many companies we could point to, I won't name names,
yeah.
that have had the opportunity to design and dominate new categories and really missed the boat because they could not get the internal alignment they need so that everyone is making the decisions that will bring them closer to that. And I often
Mm,
say the CEO is not the chief executive officer; they're the chief evangelist officer. And so,
mm.
like, that's their job to get everyone very clear what we're doing and what we're not doing. And that sometimes is the hardest thing.
Right, right. Oh, that's a good way to put it. All right, so that's great. You mentioned the four, right? Defining the problem, segmenting the audience, understanding your competitive advantage, and also preparing for commercial readiness, right? somebody who's listening, they're like, okay, how do I, like, are these all equally important? 25%? How do I know if I'm really good at commercial, but I'm really lacking at, one of the other areas? So do you have some sort of, I don't know, a way to calibrate that or benchmark that?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And, my goal is to help as many life sciences companies change the world, literally.
Yep. Yep.
And so my goal is to try to help companies figure out, like, hey, like, how, where are we missing, right? Like, where are we missing the mark? And so we kept getting these same questions, over and over again. And so we created a really simple tool called a market domination scorecard.
Mm.
And it helps you do, a quick diagnostic, for lack of a better term, about your own company around those 4 pillars.
Mm-hmm.
Because in my mind, market leadership really is not about luck. It's not about even the best technology, the best clinical data. It's really about your strategy, your preparation, and your execution.
Mm.
And so, if you would be willing to share the scorecard with your listeners, I think people would find it really helpful. Again, honesty matters. Like, you
Yep.
got to be brutally honest with yourself and be like, hey, let me assess myself. But we basically take you through those 4 pillars and just
Ah.
ask some very simple questions. And, we've created a really simple scale. You can kind of rate yourself from, 1 to 10 in each of these areas. And it tells you really, of the 4 pillars, where you may be doing really well, maybe where are you not doing as well. And that at least tips your hat of, like, this is where we need to be working. But I
Mm.
would still go back and say, like, if you can't find a problem that you can uniquely solve for a certain audience, you're probably not a category designer in the making. You're
Yep.
probably competing. And so, for example, we had a company that came to us, I don't know, last year, I guess, and they said, we're very excited, we have this amazing technology, we're going in this massive space. It's basically spinal fusion,
Mm.
and there's 350 bone grafts, so, bone graft replacements on the market, but ours is going to be better. We have better clinical data. And I was like, oh Lord, like, here we go again. And
Yeah.
we kind of walked them, we said, so you're going to be the 351st, bone graft on the
Yep.
market? Like, that sounds like a terrible idea. But we essentially led them through a similar diagnostic and said, okay,
Mm.
let's start with our discussor, delighter map. What are the discussors that aren't being solved by the other 350 bone grafts? And that really helped us get to the problem, which is, you want quality bone fusion, if
Yep.
you're having a spinal fusion, but you also, it takes too long. And no one had ever really considered the idea of it takes too long. It's just, it
Mm.
takes 12 months. It takes, that's just how long it takes. It's like baking a cake, right? You're like, if I'm going to bake a cake, it takes 45 minutes to cook. And that's part of being a category designer, is challenging those premises. Like, why does it take 45 minutes to bake a cake? Why does it take, 12 to 24 months to heal a bone, fusion? And so we help them realize through the problem step, which is, what if you could actually solve or create fusion faster? It was a
Mm.
new lever to pull. And so we basically said, well, who cares about this most? Who wants faster fusion? If your patient's a healthy 20-year-old that got in a car accident, they're probably going to fuse fine. But if you're
Yeah.
an older patient, maybe a smoker, osteoporosis, cancer, what have you, those patients really are challenged. So let's go to surgeons who are focusing primarily on those patients. So those patients live in greater concentration in certain markets or certain care centers. And the answer is yes. Southern states and academic medical centers, they treat the higher risk patients.
Mm.
Then there's this idea of competitive advantage. Are you truly different? They are. They actually are truly different. They're not trying to be better. They were trying to be better. And we said, hey, don't compete on price. Don't try to compete on your clinical efficacy. Even if it is better, no one really cares. And we said, you need to create a different category. Instead of being a bone growth substitute, you're a bone growth accelerator. So bone
Mm.
graft substitute or a bone growth accelerator. Instantly, people realize, I want bone growth as
Mm.
fast as possible, not a bone graft substitute. And so,
Yep.
like, that competitive advantage, no one else can say, oh, we're also a bone growth accelerator. They're not. They're a bone graft substitute.
Mm.
Different things. And then the idea is, now they're just getting ready for commercial
Yep.
approval. But now the work really begins. It's teaching the market that basically, why are you sacrificing speed? You don't
Mm.
have to sacrifice quality. You can keep that, but you need to basically augment your treatment with speed.
Yep.
And you have to get the sales reps to basically only call on certain surgeons in certain settings with certain language.
Mhm.
Marketing's job at this point is about teaching the market that essentially, what if you could accelerate, the bone fusion? Like, wouldn't that be amazing? Guess what, you
Yep.
can. So it's teaching people. And then they have to essentially align their medical affairs with making sure that they've got the right clinical data, that they're educating people, creating, CME courses, et cetera, because people aren't going to know about it. And then
Yep.
lastly, you have to fund the company appropriately. Stop spending money on, certain things if it's not going to help you really change the world. And I think that those really all come down to commercial readiness. And so I think,
Yep.
that's just a quick example, but the scorecard can be really, really helpful in helping you identify, where do we need to lean into? Where should we
Mhm.
accelerate? And what do we
Yep.
just have to kind of tweak? And sometimes it's just tweaking. It's not, throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I know. I wasn't kidding when I when I started the top of the episode saying I love your energy, because I know we've had some chats before recording this one, and like talking stuff, and it blows my mind. You're all about frameworks. You know the stats. You are giving extremely actionable stuff that you've learned. Like it's obvious, right? When you pause, I don't know if you do or if you don't, but when you pause, you're not thinking about medtech, medical device clients, and all these things. When you're just sitting back and relaxing, what is your vision, either for your personal self as an entrepreneur, or your company, Gray Matter, or your employees? What are you thinking on that level?
So we talk about this. We get together every quarter. We're remote. We've always been
Yeah.
remote. We get together every quarter. We're getting ready to meet up in Nashville next month. And I feel a sense of purpose that,
Mm.
I want people to, one, I don't even know who to attribute this quote to, but the quote is something to the extent of, um, the people who, well, I'm going to say it wrong, but essentially the idea is, um, you have agency to create the future you want.
Mm.
And the idea in my mind is that, in my mind, translates to freedom to choose, how you work, where you work, with whom you work, how long you work, what you charge for your work. And I really want Gray Matter to um, have that luxury
Yeah.
of really being able to pick companies that we believe are primed to change the healthcare landscape, but they need our help. Like, I feel like we
Mm.
have superpower, and we're going to use that superpower for good or bad. So I think that's just something I feel really passionate about. I want my team to feel that it's a privilege to work here, and they'll work here as long as it serves them. So that's
Yep.
really important to me. I think the second part is, I'm from the South originally, and I love country music.
Mm.
And June Carter, who was married to Johnny Cash, um, she had a phrase or a saying, which was, I'm just trying to matter."
Mm.
And I liked that idea of, like, I'm just trying to matter. I just want to make a difference.
Yep.
It goes back to kind of Gray Matter's tagline, "Do what matters." To me, like, just want to make an impact. And
Mm.
my husband is a big Golden State Warrior fan. We were watching them play basketball the other night, and there was like a Charmin commercial,
Yep.
Charmin toilet paper. And I was like, thank God I don't have to, like, make toilet paper, advertisements for a living. It just was
Yeah.
a real stark contrast of kind of, what we do and how special it is, and how I truly feel like I drank the Kool-Aid when I first got exposed to robotics, back in the day. And I realized this is an amazing opportunity.
Mm.
I feel incredibly blessed, and I feel like we're really just scratching the surface. I think it's such an exciting time with technology, just opportunities. Like, we're just getting going in some ways, and I feel like that, to me, gets me out of bed in the morning. I'm not even a coffee drinker, if you can believe it. I don't drink coffee.
Wow.
I'm more of a Coca-Cola drinker, but
Okay.
still, it's just this idea of, to be so lucky to be in this space, and to recognize the impact we're having, and to be able to work with some of the finest minds, scientists and doctors in the world, and then
Mm.
seeing how it translates to patients, to me is pretty unique, I feel like, when it
Yeah.
comes to, working and building a career.
Yeah, two things there. First, the three word phrase that you said, "do what matters," like that is so powerful, and anybody can take that. Whether you are an entrepreneur, whether you are an employee in a company, whether you're just starting out your career, that is like $1 million advice. That if you just put that as your focus, you're eventually going to start doing things that actually matter, right? Like nobody needs to tell you do this, do this, do that to get promoted or to, get more clients, whatever. But if you just keep that, so that's a really good takeaway that I'm going to remember from this one. And second, I'm surprised that you don't drink coffee because you do have a lot of energy. And side note, I don't know if you've ever tried it or what your initial reactions are, but my father-in-law has this habit of mixing coffee with Coca-Cola. And the first time he did it, I was like, "What are you doing? This is so awkward." And he's like, "No, try it." He made, because he drinks black coffee, and he puts like a little bit of Coca-Cola on the top so you can get that fizz. Actually, really good. I don't drink Coca-Cola or any soda. I love coffee, but I don't know if you've ever heard anybody else do that
I
stuff.
have. I've also heard Coke and wine, red wine, which also seems crazy to me, but I can
Yeah.
see it's very sweet, right? So it'd be
Mm.
like kind of like a little effervescent sugar coating. But no, it's funny. I feel like my husband chokes. He says, "I'm gonna get Alzheimer's one day, and I'm gonna forget that I don't drink coffee, and I'm gonna start drinking coffee at
Yeah.
80 years old." So yeah, I'll keep you posted.
Yeah. Anyone that has been listening to you for however long we've been talking here, when they log off, they go back, do their own thing, whether they're in medical device, medtech, life sciences, whether they're a CEO or maybe working at an agency like you are. What's one step or takeaway that you want to leave them with after this is done?
I think the simplest framework I try to think about, again, agnostic of your industry or sector, is nobody cares about what you make. They care
Hmm.
about what you make happen. And I think it goes back to everything we buy or use, it's to get something. It's to, solve a problem, have an
Yep.
experience, what have you. And I think we're just all like so focused on the product, and we lose sight, again, why would someone do something? And so I just always try to think about that, as ask yourself, what do you make happen? What does your
Mm.
product make happen? And it can be, you could be an entrepreneur selling a service, you can make a product, but what do you make happen for people? And again, it might be a specific segment, but I always really try to encourage people to think about that. What do you make happen?
Yeah. No, that's
The other
that's.
thing I would say is that everyone, I think, has a superpower,
Hmm.
and I don't think people give themselves enough credit. And I would challenge you to really, really, think about what's something that you do. I don't say better, different than anybody else. It could be that
Hmm.
you, to your point, you make the best coffee and your secret is that you're putting, Coke in it. But everyone has a superpower. And I think we just are conditioned that we're maybe not good enough, someone's better. That's not relevant, but it is. And I feel
Hmm.
like the more clarity we have on what is our secret sauce, what's our superpower, I think it can be very empowering and can
Yeah.
really lead to some exciting, hopefully some exciting changes for people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as you were explaining that the superpower, angle, the one thing that came to my mind was I'm sure you've heard this, but the ikigai framework, which is basically like three circles that are coinciding, and if you're struggling to figure out what should you be doing, it's like what do you love, what are you good at? I don't know what the three pillars are, but it's basically like what are you good at, what would you like keep doing if nobody had to pay you, and then how does that align with your life purpose or like your non-work related purpose. You basically combine the two, and that's when you are basically making the competition irrelevant, not because you don't care about them, but you are just trying to be 1% better because you're in that zone, and nobody else can take that because their goals are not the same. Like their three circles are never going to be like your three circles, right? So that's a really powerful tip right there, because I feel like more people should explore that path.
I agree. I agree.
This is so
This
much fun.
I
Yeah.
was like, I feel like I've just like met an old
Y-
friend. Yeah, I feel like we should
yeah.
do this. We should do this like an annual retreat. Yeah,
Yep.
it's been a
Yep.
lot of fun, and you have such great insight. You're an intellectual capitalist, I think, in the best ways of just being really curious, wanting to help others. Yeah, I know that many people benefit from the work you put into this podcast. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I hope that we get to meet in person someday, maybe when I'm coming to San Francisco, or if you're in Raleigh, or if we end up going to the same conference. But I love everything you're doing. I love your energy. Keep going. I'm going to be rooting for Gray Matter and your
Thank
team. And
you.
thank you for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Same.
All right.
Bye.